So the Democratic National Committee has been having issues for a number of years. So they've lost a number of seats in Congress. They lost an election to Donald Trump. And even since Tom Perez replaced Debbie Wasserman Schultz as the DNC chair, they have had issues with fundraising. In July, the DNC raised $3.8 million, lagging far behind its Republican counterpart, which raised $10.2 million in the same month. This is the worst haul for any month since January 2009, when Barack Obama was first inaugurated. So with all the issues that the DNC is having, naturally there's a lot of time for DNC Chair Tom Perez to take an extra side job, because that's exactly what he's done. On September 6th, Perez accepted a teaching position at his alma mater, Brown University. Perez, a 1983 Brown graduate, will work with students, faculty, and others, sharing insight and knowledge gained from the years he served as a member of President Obama's administration, as well as his time spent as a local organizer. So I'm gonna warn you, this video is gonna go in a different direction than you might expect. But first, let's discuss the DNC chair race. So, if you hadn't paid attention while the race was happening, one of the big pluses for the Tom Perez side was that he could focus his full time as DNC chair, whereas Keith Ellison, the runner-up, was already in Congress and actually had to vow that he would step down from Congress if he were to win the DNC chair race. But he didn't win. Tom Perez won. And here's what some of Tom Perez's supporters said while he was running. I'm going with Tom Perez because we need someone who can focus on the job full-time instead of Ellison, who's still in Congress. All right, I'm jumping in. I'm rooting for Tom Perez to be DNC chair. We need a full-time chair. He's got my support. Moving forward, the Democrats must have a full-time chair. Coincidentally, Tom Perez is looking for a job. We need a full-time DNC chair. Team Tom. I'm Tom Perez for DNC chair. And it wasn't just his supporters. Tom Perez came out himself and discussed how important it was for the DNC chair to be a full-time position. Asked Thursday whether the DNC job would preclude his running for governor, Perez appeared to rule out a run for statewide office. He described the DNC chairmanship as a full-time job and said the party needs to have someone committed here for the long haul. And Tom Perez himself said, now more than ever, we need a full-time chair who can inspire people, grow our party, and speak to its broad tent. Alright, so I've taken you down the rabbit hole that Tom Perez talked about how important it was for the DNC chair to be a full-time position. And now he's taking the side gig as a teacher. But I have to be honest here. This side job as being a teacher is actually not that big of a deal. Though Perez's class only meets 7 times, it will attract some high-profile guest speakers. So it's barely even a part-time gig. They're meeting 7 times for his class. Just 7 times. So I don't think this is that big of a deal, to be honest. Now, there is some obvious hypocrisy here from what he was saying, how important it was for the DNC chair to be a full-time gig. I guess you could argue that he's not making it a full-time gig if he has another class or a class that he's teaching, but they're only meeting 7 times. So this really isn't that much off of his time spent as DNC chair. But to me, this actually speaks to a bigger issue. I don't think Tom Perez actually wants to be DNC chair. So first we have to look back at how Tom Perez was actually recruited to run. As Ellison's momentum built, the Obama White House worked to recruit Perez to run against Ellison. They succeeded, and Perez announced his candidacy on December 15th, a full month after Ellison announced. So Perez wanted the job so bad that he had to be convinced by Barack Obama to run for DNC chair. Now, the reason that happened is obvious. Keith Ellison was picking up a lot of support. And as the Bernie progressive in the race, and the guy that seemed like he was going to win the race, the establishment, the Democratic establishment, needed somebody to come in and take the job from Ellison. And the only way they could do that is by picking somebody who was high profile enough within the party, who had an attachment to the establishment, but could still be used as someone who you could convince is at least partially progressive on some issues. And that's where Tom Perez came in. So whether Tom Perez wanted the job or not, and I don't think he did, he got it. He got it because of the Democratic establishment that was behind him. And this there's more clues here that show me that Perez may not stay in this position, and he may choose to drop out as DNC chair. Now, this is complete speculation, but this is how I read Tom Perez whenever he makes appearances as the DNC chair and talks about the Democratic Party. So first, I'm going to show you an example here from a few months back where he was on MSNBC with Chris Hayes, and he appeared on the show with Bernie Sanders. Now, watch Perez talk about the Democratic Party and pay attention to everything from the words he's saying to his mannerisms and the way he speaks.
Is the DNC on board with Medicare for all single payer, Tom?
Well, you know, we want to make sure that health care is a right. It's not a privilege. And that's why we fought for the Affordable Care Act. That's why we want to continue to expand it. We want to make sure that everybody, and the Affordable Care Act has made tremendous progress. We have more work to do. And I think the unity, Chris, that we've shown in the recent efforts by Trump to repeal the Affordable Care Act have been an energizing force for Democrats, independents, others who share the values of inclusion and opportunity. And
so there's a clear lack of passion. He's stumbling around with empty rhetoric and not really saying anything. And it's obvious that Tom Perez doesn't really know what the hell he's doing. Now, compare this to when Perez was more recently on Chris Hayes' show talking about Joe Arpaio, who Perez actually brought the federal civil lawsuit against in 2012. So when I watched this clip initially, I actually wanted to do a segment on it because I was so taken aback by Tom Perez and his performance here. Because when what we're used to seeing from Tom Perez is a guy who doesn't know what he's talking about. But here, Perez clearly knows what he's talking about, and you can feel the passion coming off him. And it's a complete night and day difference. So just watch this clip.
First, explain why the government brought the case it did against Arpaio.
he repeatedly abused his authority. He was racially profiling Latinos. He was arresting people and detaining people without probable cause. He was retaliating against people who complained against his practices. He engaged in unlawful practices in the jail itself. And one of the other things we found, Chris, that is often underreported is that we found roughly 400 cases that involved allegations of rape, other serious crimes that went uninvestigated, because he had this focus on making sure Abuelita had her papers. And so we found in our investigation, and I'll note that the initial inquiry was opened in June of 2008. George W. Bush was the president when the initial inquiry was opened.
I didn't know that.
Under my watch is when we issued the letter of finding that resulted in a lengthy proceeding, and there was a parallel proceeding filed by private plaintiffs, and the same findings were adjudicated by a court, which is that he repeatedly abused his authority, engaged in unconstitutional policing. He's a disgrace to law enforcement.
Now, that was a completely different Tom Perez. That was a Tom Perez that actually knew what he was talking about and actually cared about what he was talking about. So, look, I don't know if this is going to go anywhere, but taking a side gig, a teaching job side gig, even though I don't think it's really going to affect his job too much as DNC chair, you don't take side jobs like this unless you're not that engaged with your real job. So, being DNC chair is a full-time job, but I don't think he's getting much benefit out of it. I don't think he's enjoying it. I think he's simply there as an Obama White House puppet, a Democratic establishment puppet, as a person to simply keep the Bernie Sanders wings hands off the party. Now, we're going to see how much that pressure from the establishment to stay in the party is actually going to keep him in the party. But for now, he is the DNC chair. He's staying the DNC chair. Whether that changes or not remains to be seen. But this teaching job is not that much of a big deal. I think the bigger deal is that I don't think Tom Perez actually has the passion, the interest, or the knowledge to be DNC chair.